Israel are continuing to trade strikes in a fifth straight day of conflict. Iran has launched nearly 30 missiles at Israel, with alerts activated across many areas. There have been more explosions in Tel Aviv and strikes also happening in central Israel. Let's speak to Noor Auda in the Jordanian capital Amman. She's there because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. So what does the aftermath of these latest strikes look at this hour, Noor?
Well, with this latest barrage, Sami, we know less than what we know happened, because there were direct impacts in several locations in the central area in Israel. We know that several buses caught on fire. In the larger Tel Aviv area, there was a direct impact as well. But in Herzliya, the Israeli military censor has forbidden the publication of any material that can indicate the specific target that was actually struck. And this usually means that it is of some sort of military or intelligence or strategic significance. The military censor, of course, having tightened the restrictions on publication overnight, threatening journalists who defy those orders with possible imprisonment. In the meantime, of course, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has said that in Herzliya, their target was an intelligence complex in that area. We know one such building exists, but that is the claim that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are making, and we're waiting to see if there is any Israeli response.
And what else are we hearing about the Israeli statement that they've killed a top Iranian commander?
This is the second Iranian commander, a wartime chief of staff that Israel has assassinated since Friday, Sami. And this is part of its effort, first of all, to highlight its superiority in terms of intelligence, if you will, to disrupt the chain of command. And that is a stated goal, because as far as the narrative is concerned, what we're hearing from Israeli officials is that targeting the chain of command in the Iranian forces would lessen or debilitate Iran's ability to strike back, to retaliate against these non-stop Israeli airstrikes all over Iran. In addition, of course, to targeting the weapons manufacturing, the air defense systems, the launchers of ballistic missiles, as well as, of course, the nuclear facilities. That is the narrative. We've also heard from the Israeli Minister of Defense, Sami. He's almost prolific in the past few days, and he has gone as far as threatening the supreme leader of Iran with the same fate as Saddam Hussein if he continues to, quote, commit crimes against Israel. We've heard him, of course, threatening the residents of Tehran, saying that Tehran will burn, and so on. And we've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister in previous days talking about the possibility of regime change. So this is the kind of rhetoric, the kind of atmosphere that we're in still, one of war and promises of more escalation.
Thanks so much. Noor Auda there, reporting from Amman in Jordan. Israel says it's killed the Iranian army's wartime chief of staff, as Noor was explaining there. Tel Aviv identifying him as Ali Shadmani, Tehran's most senior military commander. Tehran is yet to confirm the claim, but multiple buildings have been struck in Tehran by Israeli missiles. 3 people have been rescued from the rubble of a destroyed building. Air defense countermeasures were launched in Natanz, a strategic location with nuclear installations. Video has emerged of the destruction inside Iran's main broadcaster following an Israeli missile attack on the building. Studios and newsrooms where journalists sat at their desks have been reduced to ashes and charred debris. The Committee to Protect Journalists has condemned the attack, which killed 3 television employees. Let's bring in Tawheed Asadi, who's live for us in Tehran. So, Tawheed, from Tabriz to Natanz to an attack on Ali Shadmani. What are we hearing from Iranian officials on all of these Israeli strikes?
Oh, Sammy, so many new lines are coming as the escalation has ramped up to an unprecedented level here in the capital, seeing the strikes by the Israelis and, of course, the retaliatory reactions by the Iranian side. We hear the sounds of explosion from time to time here in the capital as a result of interception by the air defense system. Also, we hear smokes coming out, and one of them you can maybe see behind me in the picture, and that would be related, according to the initial reports, from the targeting of one depot, from one fuel depot, as Israelis are attacking actually the infrastructures, the fuel depots inside the capital and across the country. We also have had reports from Tabriz about new attacks by the Israeli forces. And here in Tehran, the situation seems a little bit, not a little bit, I may say, quite challenging, specifically after the Israeli warnings followed by the U.S. President Donald Trump, who came out to ask the residents in Tehran to evacuate the city. So you see this anxiety among ordinary citizens. But speaking of the prospects, I had a chance to talk with one of the Iranian high-ranking security officials to talk about this entire situation. He told me that Iran is not going to accept to stop striking back under this circumstance, while Iran is ready to start a line of negotiations in case, and only in case, its red lines are observed and considered. He also told me a very interesting and important point. He said that in case we see a possible U.S. intervention into this escalation, that runs the risk of dragging the entire war into a regional level. And also, he said that the current strategy by the Israelis have not fulfilled their objectives, and they are getting into new ways of attacking. And he also said that we are ready to war and to get into war with the United States, and that's something we have been prepared for the past 1 decade. So that sounds like a very clear message that Iran is trying to send to the Americans, that in case we have further players, further actors and factors getting involved in this already escalated situation, that runs the risk of a regional war. Something Iranian president previously said about this idea. He said that we're not interested in the expansion of the war, but at all events, we are under an imposed war, and the consequence of which remains, at the time being, based upon these statements, not really clear.
And we're getting more and more statements from Donald Trump telling the residents, the people of Tehran, to get out of town, talking about a complete give up. Are we getting any reaction to this from Iran?
Well, actually, we are talking about a city, Tehran, which is densely populated. We've got around more than 10 million citizens living here in the capital, but this is Tehran province, in which Tehran city is located, which hosts more than 14 million people. So it might be like sort of impossible to evacuate such a huge amount of population first. And then secondly, we've got different reactions, different sentiments when we speak to people. A group of people decided to leave the city to go to other cities nearby or anywhere else, but still we've got a part of the population who has decided to still stay in the capital. Compared to the ordinary days, we see less and considerably less traffic if we go outside at these different streets. And you go to the petrol stations, you see long lines of people who are trying to fuel their cars. But still, speaking of the utilities, things seem to be at a normal and acceptable situation in most of the parts of the capital. People are anxious, and that goes without saying, but at the same time, they are extremely angry. They are extremely angry seeing that these strikes not only do they target the military and nuclear sites, but also they have targeted the very ordinary citizens and the very residential buildings and living casualties, civilian casualties. Hundreds, if not more, has been reported so far.
All right, thanks so much to our correspondent in Iran, Tawheed Asadi there. Israeli forces have killed more than 70 Palestinians across Gaza since early morning on Tuesday. More than 50 of them were killed in Khan Yunis while waiting for food. Gaza's health ministry says Israeli tanks opened fire on crowds of people waiting for aid trucks to arrive in the south of the Strip. At least 200 Palestinians are reported to have been wounded. The injured and dead were taken to Al-Nasser hospital, which has been overwhelmed in its efforts to treat the wounded.
Tens of thousands of civilians were gathered in the large square, waiting for aid. All of a sudden, 2 Israeli bombs were dropped in the middle of the crowds. Dozens of civilians, including children, were killed. More than 200 innocent civilians were blown apart. Body parts were scattered all over the place. The number of victims is way more than those brought to the hospital. No one could reach them to provide help.
Hani Mahmoud joins us now live from Gaza City. So, Hani, what are we hearing from some of those Palestinians about the killings of 50 Palestinians when they're waiting for food?
Well, Sammy, at this point, it's quite heartbreaking as the number keeps increasing by the hours. Let's just start from the hospital, Nasser Medical Complex in the city of Khan Yunis, that is now overwhelmed with many of the cases, many of the critically injured, close to 200 people, women and children, elderly, who were at the bombed site when the Israeli military opened fire indiscriminately, killing close to 50 people and injuring close to 200. All of these 200 were transferred to Nasser Medical Complex and the nearby field hospital. The majority are in Nasser Medical Hospital. This is what the hospital had to do in order to accommodate the large influx of injury. They had to make a decision of discharging many of the cases inside the hospital, critical ones, need of continuous, constant medical care. They had to be let out of the hospital to make room for the injured ones who arrived at the hospital for close to 3 hours, non-stop. Civilian vehicles, carts, drone animals, carts bringing and transferring injuries from the eastern part of Khan Yunis to Nasser Medical Complex. The scene from inside the hospital, the floor of the emergency wards, the operating theater, more of a bloodbath given the large number of those who were wounded. This is unfortunately has become the daily routine. A few months ago, it was the daily struggle of running from the unpredictable falling bombs. Now Palestinians are dying as they try to get food. As for more than 3 months now, we are without any food supplies or basic necessity due to the ongoing blockade, and people had no other choice but to show up at these sites in order to pick up a bag of flour or any of the food parcels to feed their children and to help them survive these difficult conditions. The incident just highlights the lack of efficiency, the lack of safety measures by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Unfortunately, it has been very arbitrary all the way across the Gaza Strip. From day one, it started operations. We're seeing a patterns of ongoing targeting, shooting, and killing of Palestinians simply as they show up at these sites out of desperation to pick up whatever food available for their children.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Hani Mahmoud from Gaza City. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continue to carry out incursions across the occupied West Bank. At least 27 Palestinians have been detained on Tuesday during raids in Jenin and Tulkarm. Israel has placed the territory under lockdown, sealing the entrances of cities with iron gates and checkpoints. Palestinians say Israel's siege is aimed at expanding illegal settlements. Stay with us here on Al Jazeera. We'll be back in a moment with more special coverage of the conflict between Israel and Iran.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Why is Musk deciding to go up against the US president?
Informed opinions.
We are in times where resolutions, words, and positions matters not. France was shipping ammunition. The UK continues to send scraps of F-35s.
Critical debate.
The sanctions have failed to stop the war.
The problem is that quite a number of countries help Russia to bypass sanctions.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
After Israel's attack on Iran, turbulence in the Middle East is likely to dominate a meeting of G7 leaders being held here in Canada's Rocky Mountains. But in these uncertain times, the conflict in Ukraine and the global trade war and tariffs will also be on the agenda. The G7 summit on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. You're watching Al Jazeera. Time to recap our headlines. Iran and Israel are continuing to trade strikes in a fifth day of conflict. The Iranians have launched nearly 30 missiles at Israel, with alerts activated across many areas. There have been more explosions in Tel Aviv, strikes in central Israel too. Multiple buildings have been struck in Tehran. Israel says it's killed one of Iran's top commanders, the wartime chief of staff. Tehran is yet to confirm the claim, though. US President Donald Trump has said he's looking for better than a ceasefire from while talking to reporters on Air Force One. He was addressing the ongoing strikes between the Iranians and Israel. Trump left the summit of G7 leaders a day early. He said French President Emmanuel Macron had got it wrong, though, when he said that Donald Trump was looking for a ceasefire. He also insisted the US was doing pretty well in its support for Israel.
I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're looking for better than a ceasefire. Remember, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. We don't have to go too deep into it. They just can't have a nuclear weapon.
What was the thinking on the call for Tehran to evacuate? Is there a threat or is there incoming? What was the thinking on the full evacuation?
I want people to be safe. And that's always possible. A thing like that could happen. I just want people to be safe.
There's reports that you want to send the Vice President and Steve Witkoff to meet with the Iranians and have discussions. Is that something you're considering?
Not sure yet. I may. Depends on what happens when I get back.
What specifically is better than a ceasefire? What are you looking for here?
An end. A real end, not a ceasefire. An end.
So something that would be permanent?
Yeah. Or giving up entirely.
Is that okay too? Are you close there? Is that possible? Is that possible in the next 24
Why not? Certainly possible. Complete give up. That's possible, yeah.
Well, Phil Lavelle joins us live from Washington, D.C. And Phil, where to start with all of these statements aboard Air Force One? An end, not just a ceasefire, a complete give up. Do we know what that says about Donald Trump's plan at this stage?
Well, quite simply, Sammy, he's aiming for the sky, right? He's going for the ultimate option, which is to make sure that Iran completely gives up on any nuclear weapons ambitions. That is the goal. I mean, he referred to this idea of a ceasefire, and he almost seemed insulted by the idea of a ceasefire, like it would be the second best option. In fact, you know, when he said that Emmanuel Macron had mooted the idea of a ceasefire, which he did just before Donald Trump left the G7 summit, it seems that Donald Trump was quite annoyed by that. I mean, you saw the tweet or the Truth Social post he put out in which he referred to him as a publicity seeker, said he'd got it all wrong and he was aiming for something much bigger. Of course, for much of the night as he was flying back from Canada to the United States, there was this concern that the US might be going the other way and might be about to launch military strikes against Iran, particularly after Donald Trump had put out that Truth Social post in which he had warned the people of Tehran Iran to evacuate. And we'd heard the news that when he had landed, he was going to be convening with his national security team. When he was asked about that message, when he told people to evacuate, he said he didn't really mean anything by it. He just said it because he didn't want people to get hurt. And the White House has sort of rolled back a little bit and said that the security team were always on call for the last few days. They've been on 24-hour call to speak to the president. But he said he wanted to be back in the Situation Room because he felt, quite simply, it's easier to be there in person than to do all of this by phone. So he definitely wants Iran to give up on its nuclear options. The way he's going to do it, though, it sounds like it's going to be through some form of negotiation, even though he doesn't want to be the one to do it, because he said that he's not in the mood to negotiate. He says he's not reached out to Tehran. He said, and I quote, "They know where I am if they want to speak to me." The indication is that he might be leaning towards, as we heard in that clip, sending J.D. Vance, his vice president, along with his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, to do the negotiating. But either way, he's very clear. He does not want to move into military action, at least not publicly. And he's getting a lot of pushback within his own party about the prospect of the US moving in that military direction. He says he just wants Iran to give up its nuclear weapons. He wants that ultimate deal.
All right, thanks so much, Phil Lavelle there from Washington, D.C. Now, within the last hour, the Qatari Foreign Ministry has held a news conference to discuss how it's trying to push diplomatic solutions to the war between Iran and Israel. We're joined now with more by Osama bin Javaid, who's watching that news conference. So, Osama, does it look like there's an opening for some kind of regional effort to de-escalate?
Well, this was underlined by the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Dr. Majid al-Ansari, that this region cannot bear any more burden of destabilization. He called it a reckless move by Israel to attack especially the nuclear and energy facilities in Iran, and urged all sides to come back to the negotiating table. I asked him if there is hope at the end of the tunnel, if he sees a breakthrough on the horizon. And he said he's speaking to the Qatari government, is speaking to all partners at all levels. The Qatari Emir has been speaking to the Iranian president. The Qatari Prime Minister has been speaking to his counterparts in the region and the foreign ministers beyond to try and find some sort of a solution. The Qataris believe that this was all heading in a direction of there was some sort of negotiations on the horizon, both for Gaza between Hamas and Israel, and both between Iran and Israel. And this attack has further escalated all of this. So we asked him if there is hope, and he believes that these sides, unless there is a ceasefire, unless the fighting stops, they won't be able to move into a direction of to try and bring in both sides to the table.
It comes to our hope in a diplomatic solution. We always remain hopeful. We are always seeing a diplomatic solution as the only way out of all of these crises in the region and beyond. And we have always been actively engaged in reaching these diplomatic solutions. When it comes to the situation between Israel and Iran, our contacts with all of our regional partners and international partners are ongoing. You can follow the news of every communique that we issue and read out that we issue of every call that is taking place. And there is a very clear emphasis on the need of a diplomatic solution and the need to pull the parties back into talks rather than escalation. We have warned that this escalation will have ramifications on the region as a whole and international energy markets in a way that is unpredictable if the escalation remains like this.
Well, Alon Pinkas is a former Israeli diplomat and columnist for the independent newspaper in the UK. He says Israel is at risk of achieving nothing with its attack on Iran.
If there's going to be a de-escalation, it's going to come from the U.S. Whether that'll come from the U.S. or not, obviously we don't know. And in fact, President Trump is issuing contradictory statements every day. So that remains to be seen. From an Israeli point of view, while there are no signs of de-escalation, there are also no signs of escalation. This targeted assassination, this targeted elimination of the Iranian new chief of staff is consistent with what Israel has been doing in the last 4.5, almost 5 days. And that is trying to take out the upper echelon of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and the military. I don't think that necessarily signals an escalation. Look, if it ends now in this status quo, then obviously aside from feeling good about themselves, Israel would gain nothing. So that really depends on whether or not Iran goes back into negotiations of a nuclear deal under somewhat different conditions than it was before, than it participated in before the Israeli attack. Now, there was no question to begin with that Israel cannot take out, cannot eliminate, cannot destroy Iran's military nuclear infrastructure alone. That requires munitions and bombers and delivery systems that Israel does not have, which is why Mr. Netanyahu was so adamant, so insistent, and so focused on trying to drag the U.S. into the war. And so if it ends without this and without an agreement, then I don't know if that benefits him. But the big prize, quote unquote, is the heavily fortified underground facility in Fordo, just south of Tehran. Now, if you ask Israeli military planners, they will probably tell you that they'd like nothing more than for the U.S. to deliver the final blow. But they're also realistic, and they know that that may not happen necessarily. They also know, and they say that, although anonymously, that this requires a diplomatic solution, meaning a new agreement.
Well, before we go, a reminder of our top story. Iran and Israel continuing to trade strikes in a fifth day of conflict. The Iranians have launched nearly 30 missiles at Israel, with alerts activated across many areas. There have also been more explosions in Tel Aviv, and strikes happening in central Israel. That's it. Weather is next, then it's Inside Story.